So there's a way to track how Bitcoin can move. There's a correlation which has been speculated and theorized about, that it has a relation to the global M2 money supply. And this predictor says that we should be headed for Bitcoin at 70,000. Lucas, I know you care more about M4, but have you been exposed to this idea before? There's some guys on X that have been posting about this, and I'll bring it up.
I have always been more interested in Bitcoin as a measure of the money supply. So I'm more than just a like staring at it and say the price of Bitcoin is going up. It's another thing to look at Bitcoin and say, oh, we have a limited supply here. If there is only so much money that exists in the world, can we use the limited supply of Bitcoin to measure, or does it reflect the amount of money that floats around in the world? And M2, you said I like M4. M4 includes private money as well as public money. M2 is a measure ostensibly of liquidity provided by central banks of the world. And we've definitely, yes, this is a wonderful graph that's showing sort of the amount of money that's being created by central banks in the world. And people talk a lot about the base rate of the Federal Reserve of the United States, but this is also what they are doing when they're creating money. And we've seen a lot of money created by monetizing debt that's been approved by the Treasury of the United States. And I think you said this is global, so this probably includes other central banks of the world too, but I'm not sure.
Well, one other thing that is often referenced with respect to the price of Bitcoin is that there's this chart, this logarithmic chart that says the price of Bitcoin should stay within a certain band. It's been predicted, people have tracked this price over time. And so essentially we haven't fallen outside of this band, but when we enter into this blue and purple part of the curve of this rainbow chart, that's when things start to look ugly for people that got into this. So that's another thing to keep watch on if you're interested in the price of Bitcoin and where it seems to be headed. If we were to touch sub 70, that would put us at absolute max pain on this rainbow chart and would be most favorable to Michael Saylor, who, I don't know if you saw that he announced this morning that they're doing another at the money offering. They're going to buy some more Bitcoin. He says, this looks like a very attractive price to me. And he's said this many times, that he intends to keep buying Bitcoin and keep buying the top, no matter what the price of Bitcoin is. He's going to keep buying.
What sort of impact, if any, did you see from the announcement of the strategic Bitcoin reserve?
None, because the strategic, well, I mean, actually, I think it caused the price to go down. It certainly wasn't a positive thing. It was a sell the news event, but it seemed like the strategic reserve at the United States is just to take their ill-gotten gains, what they've seized from people, and they're going to hold it instead of selling it. That is not what had been talked about before. I remember during the campaign that they said that they were going to buy $1 million a day or something of Bitcoin, and this was going to proceed for some period of time, and that sounds like that's not going to happen. So I think it was negative on price of Bitcoin because people thought they were going to start buying up lots of Bitcoin.
It's interesting. I would have thought even if the government was not going out and buying more Bitcoin on the market, that the announcement of a strategic Bitcoin reserve would have had a positive impact on the price. But there's a whole lot of other noise that's been going on with the tariffs and the stock market being essentially a tapestry of red. So I don't know. And I've also gotten out of the habit of making any prediction or having any expectation of where the price of Bitcoin is going to go.
Yeah, this posting I think summarized it pretty well. It said BTC was going to be put into the reserve, that they wanted to develop budget neutral plans where they could buy more BTC, but none of this really seemed to be a super bullish signal towards Bitcoin, in my opinion. And we almost, as soon as this got announced the way it did, the price dropped pretty substantively pretty quickly.
There's also, it seems to be that there is a growing crescendo of cries to end the Federal Reserve. It used to be H. Ross Perot with his charts, and then Ron Paul. Thomas Massey picked up the banner, but it seems that there are more and more voices that are calling in the Federal Reserve. I'm not sure what the world looks like in the future, if there is no Federal Reserve, or if the United States does not have its own federal currency. So, which is also why I thought both the purchases of gold since Trump's inauguration, and also these announcements of strategic reserves, is interesting. But I don't know what that means for the price of Bitcoin as measured in these quasi-public pieces of paper that are called dollars, that are owned by a private banking cabal. Which
Right. And this did come up as far as, how does the Fed actually interact with the president? This is not an appointee of the president. This is a private bank. Powell said he's not going to step down even if the president asks him to. So, Jerome Powell is here to stay. He's not leaving, and unless they go in and make some big changes, the Federal Reserve is not going to be any different than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and Trump not only asked Jerome Powell to step down, he did so in the wake of asking Jerome Powell, or maybe telling Jerome Powell, to lower the federal funds rate, the base rate, for lending money to banks in the United States. And Jerome Powell said, no, we've got to soak up some of this. We've got to soak up more of this money that was created. We have a dual mandate, to stabilize prices and to keep people employed. But right now, we have a deeper concern in stabilizing prices, and we're very scared that prices are going to continue to rise unless we continue to keep the interest rate high. And Trump was not happy about that, and he asked Jerome Powell to step down. Jerome Powell said no. So, Donald Trump is not bound in many ways by what has been before. He's unburdened by what has been.
Oh, we're picking up that mantra. Nice. I love that. That was Harris's campaign rhetoric. Unburdened by what has been.
Yeah, although it should have been Donald Trump's mantra. Unburdened by what is, because Donald Trump is not afraid to try to try new ways as he sort of starts and goes and fits with his tariff policy. And again, has the United States has brought physically 2,000 tons of gold into the nation since his inauguration. So I don't know. I've been very interested. When he addressed Congress last week, I wondered if there would be any announcement. Of course, there wasn't. Um, Changes of such magnitude are made quietly in the background, but we should keep our eye on Donald Trump's relationship with the Federal Reserve, what the government does with things like its gold reserve and because the gold reserve is actually owned by the Treasury and not the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, it holds custody of it. And we talked about gold a couple of weeks ago and how governments own the gold and then they long-term lease it or custody it to banks that then have other layers of paper and time windows for loaning that out that are smaller than their borrowing terms with the central governments.
Well,
So
you've been beating the drum of gold for a while now. I mean, this is not the first time we've talked about this, but I don't know if you're noticing what's going on in the markets, but all risk assets seem to be trading very correlated today. Everything is down except gold. Gold is like the safe haven. It's been the safe haven for months now, and it looks like today is no different. Gold just sits there, not moving down, and everything else is dropping by 5 to double digit 5% or even double digits for a lot of equities and prices. And all crypto seems to be trading pretty correlated right now. So there's nobody that's really operating as an outlier. So goes Bitcoin. So it seems the rest of equities and all risk assets.
I find it strange that I actually talk so much about gold of late, but it's only in the wake of these purchases by the United States government that I've begun to be so interested in gold. I used to think that, well, one, I should also draw a distinction. I don't go out and I don't stack gold. I don't keep it in a safe. There are too many problems with the physical security of gold, and also my inability to easily tell what is pure gold or what the quality is, and other problems like that. But I think if you start if you're trying to watch or predict or understand how countries are behaving with each other, then the role of gold in international currency is unavoidable. And if you're also thinking about the impacts that Bitcoin is having on the world, in some ways it is used to supplant gold or to stand in its place. This is why people talk about it as Bitcoin as digital gold. But while it may mimic some of the properties of gold, and I think the most interesting of all of those is the limited supply of Bitcoin, there is still the legacy and the distribution of gold that is going to play heavily in the relationships of international currencies. And that we have used the dollar as a stable coin nominally like pegged to the amount of gold that the United States held. um that has been an interesting interlude of sort of a sideshow or a layer over gold, but um it has always been the even in the time of the dollar supremacy, gold still was ostensibly backing up that dollar. So as we see more the problems that are inherent in the supply of dollars that exist in the world today, it will be we'll see how strongly gold plays in the background, and how new players like Bitcoin enter into that mix.
Well, as far as all price things go, I think that this is going to be an interesting time to see how much tariffs will affect the U.S. Uh, I think this return of a lot of the gold supply to the United States is a very interesting thing to keep an eye on. I just always watch for these disconnects where we have assets that are trading independently. When you have assets that are trading correlated, it's a big market trend, but where you see divergences, that's where it's an interesting thing to take a look at. And so I I'm definitely watching this all assets versus gold as a very interesting sign with everything that we've been talking about in the past. And I would not at all be surprised to see Bitcoin get very close to 70,000, given some of the ways that people have discussed these things having a correlation with M2 and how it would lag. So if this is a theory you ascribe to, or if you're hearing about it for the first time, definitely something you might want to check into with at least this guy's account, this Joe Consorti. He's got quite a few posts on this, so you can look at his feed and see a bunch of things where he talked about this in the past, and he's continuing to talk about it. So it's a theory that seems to have some merit to it.
Grant, you follow the Bitcoin community more so than I. How has Trump's tariff plans rang through the Bitcoin community? Are they all for it, or are they dubious about tariffs, or do they see any correlation to where Bitcoin plays in all of that?
I haven't heard as much tariff related Bitcoin. The strategic reserve was definitely on the minds of many in the Bitcoin community. And I think that there was a lot of unhappiness with respect to the way that these reserves were talked about. There is definitely a culture of maximalism within the Bitcoin community that many ascribe to. And this idea that the US would include XRP and ADA and some other coins in that strategic reserve did not sit well. That definitely didn't go over, as these things are all considered to be, somewhat garbage assets and not at all like Bitcoin. So I think that was more what's been on the minds of a lot of people in the Bitcoin community. Tariffs doesn't seem like it plays into it quite as much. Definitely all of this crypto task force stuff that's been happening has been front and center, as well as these discussions have shaped up more and more, and seeing Michael Saylor sit at the table and some of his dismay about the ways that the president is talking about different crypto assets and Bitcoin in particular. It seems like there's some things that he's saying that are just off, and it's causing concern that he doesn't really understand this stuff very well, and that he's going to make some bad policy moves based on his misunderstanding of certain ways that these things all work. I don't know if you heard, but there was some talk about buying stable coins, and that seems like the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Why the US government would buy stable coins, that's about the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
I would agree, and I was actually about to ask also what the narrative in the Bitcoin community is. So one, I can understand them being upset about the basket of currencies, and they should be. Um, but I all but, well they one I wonder about what the general idea of what was going to occur with a strategic reserve would be. And I think there's a lot of very short-sighted. Well, there'll be a large number of Bitcoin that are purchased if the U.S. government is behind it, and yay, the value of my Bitcoin will go up because there will be more pressure um, driving the price up with a large institution like the U.S. government buying it. But setting that aside, the question becomes, what do you do if you have this strategic reserve? And to my mind, uh, you would use it to begin to set up alternative um, or a government currency. Now that gets problematic with the rules laid down in the Constitution, but why should that hold us back? We interpret them as we wish. Um, uh, uh, you know, notwithstanding the creation and the government associations with the Federal Reserve. So as we've already gone down that path, I begin to think about, well, stable coins provide some of the answers that some conservative some conservatives would like to see in the government. And I think about limiting the monetary supply and what that would mean, how that could be structured on top of Bitcoin, both with its limited supply and also a known and visible number that exists in a strategic reserve. But then you come to the the reticence and the concerns about digital currencies with the trackability and the public aspects of them. So what is there any discussion in the Bitcoin community about a stable coin that is built on top of a strategic supply?
I think it is something that the Bitcoin community would like to see, honestly. If Bitcoin isn't just straight adopted as currency, which it doesn't look like it's likely to do. I mean, the scaling technologies that many want to develop are just stymied by this ossification of the scripting language. And until Bitcoin has a better way to scale, it certainly cannot be a global unit of exchange that is being used on a daily basis by the entire planet. So what is the next alternative? Well, it then becomes some sort of a thing that is traded amongst the big banks or amongst major players that are using it as this asset that underpins other things. And both of these ideas were talked about in the early days of Bitcoin and like throughout all of Bitcoin's life, is that this was one way that you could interpret the utilization of Bitcoin, its limited supply, the fact that it was created and is backed by proof of work is a mechanism by which it forms a special type of asset and therefore could be used as something that you could use to build other more scalable solutions on top of. Of course, a lot of people were just very upset about that. They said there's no reason we can't make the currency that runs the whole world. Let's fix Bitcoin, or let's make it so that it can do everything that we hoped it always could be and could do. So you definitely still have these arguments happening within the Bitcoin community on a relatively daily basis. But Lightning is not a scaling solution that anybody really seems that excited about. And while it's working to some extent, it's not really the thing that could handle the world's transactional volume. Not even close. So I'd say stable coins are still an important thing. I mean, we don't really even have a stable coin on Bitcoin that's generally accepted because we don't even have a standard that really makes any sense for any type of other assets on Bitcoin. All this stuff that's been done with ordinals and JPEGs on the chain is still very controversial. So we still don't have the ability to create these types of coins. And so if you're going to do this, create some kind of stable coin that's backed by Bitcoin and it's blockchain based, it would have to be on some other chain, something else. And that I don't think would sit well if it isn't some type of proof of work type of thing. So I don't know. It's a bit of a rock and a hard place, I think, for the Bitcoin community, is that there is a desire for these things to happen. But then if you think about, well, what's the next logical consequence, then it's money that isn't blockchain based. And it is definitely going to be inflationary, and it's definitely going to be in the hands of central bankers. And none of that, I think, is what Bitcoin wanted. Not at all. That is the antithesis of what was trying to be created here. So I think that there's a technological revolution in Bitcoin that needs to happen. And this is the focus of the conversation: how to get to covenants, how to get to the types of scaling solutions that can make Bitcoin adoptable by more people and to be ubiquitously used.
Well, you're talking about, and so much of the heuristic is about developing all of this within the network of Bitcoin. But I wonder, as Bitcoin gets put into a strategic reserve along with other currencies, if the path forward for stablecoins is not them purchasing Bitcoin or other layer one tokens and adding to that strategic reserve and pegging the stable coin that they create to the amount of whatever crypto assets that they've put in that strategic reserve,
Well,
and
what I'm bringing up is when you say a stable coin, that usually implies that it's blockchain based. I mean, we can call anything we want a stable coin, but like if you say that, it usually means some sort of blockchain based thing that has uh, has a direct tie to U.S. monetary policy. That has typically meant that you track the price of the US dollar and you try to keep it fixed to the price of the US dollar, and that it's exchangeable and directly backed by some amount of dollars. And if we talk about creating one of those and backing it with the strategic reserve, it has to be on a chain. And what chain would it be on? So far we don't have a technology that can scale the way that we would need to for some kind of digital dollar unless it's using these very centralized techniques, and that is all super distasteful. So there's no real desire in the Bitcoin community for this kind of thing because it's so antithetical to all of the core values of Bitcoin. So I guess that's just the answer. And to go back to why I said buying stablecoin is so stupid is because if you think about the U.S. government buying stablecoin, it's like this is like swimming in a circle because you have some private corporation like Tether or whatever, or maybe Circle, that creates this coin on whatever chain, whether it be an Ethereum L2 or whatever variety of different chains that have stable coins, and then they're backed by treasuries. And so this is the most roundabout stupid thing that the US government could possibly do, because there'd be no reason to hold this, because essentially what's underpinning it is the thing that the US is creating through treasuries. Most of these stable coins are backed with treasuries, and that's how they achieve this stability, is that they've got this is what's backing them. And so it just seems like the craziest thing in the world. And so to answer the question, I just don't know that there's a lot of appetite for the strategic reserve being the backing for some kind of CBDC, given that you couldn't do the CBDC on Bitcoin, and therefore it makes the whole thing not that appealing or interesting to the Bitcoin community.
Well, I'm glad you bring up Circle and Tether because we call those stable coins, but um, they've just bought treasuries to back the number of dollars that they've created, maybe. Um, so, and to me, when I think about a stable coin that's built on top natively on top of a layer one token, there's also the issue of we don't know how many of those tokens are actually available. I mean, we still go back to concerns with Bitcoin in that the Satoshi era wallets have a massive amount of Bitcoin in some wallets, and people often make the assumption that those Bitcoin are burnt, but I don't know if they are, and more broadly, it's very difficult to know how many um, how many wallet seed phrases have been lost, how many people have lost access to their Bitcoin, or what that would look like. So I do like I do like a reserve of currency that you can prove prove that you can move it about in, or those people who've deposited into the reserve can move and still control it. I think those are important things to know about the actual control of what that reserve is. So,
Well, you've also got to think about how you custody that or secure it. It's been a fundamental problem for forever in crypto, is that using 12 words to secure this mathematically is secure, but it means that you have a fundamental issue, is that somebody somewhere somehow saw words. And even if you have a multi-sig, managing all of this is fairly tricky to pull off in practice. And so if we don't see some sophistication in how the US government would hold on to that strategic reserve, especially utilizing a multi-sig, and that if there isn't like a substantive ceremony and proof around the fact that all of this crypto is still held appropriately and that it's being managed correctly, then it it leaves me very nervous, because we have seen issues with custody time and time again, where we we believe that certain entity is capable of managing the crypto appropriately, and then we find out that it isn't. And this, I think, is one of the most important things, that whatever entity is tasked with custodying these funds, and as Bitcoin goes up in value, which, even though we're talking about sub 70, many people are saying that we're poised for a 10x rip. So even though this is happening in the early part of this year, there's people have said very vocally last year that they think that Bitcoin should be at $250,000 per coin, or $700,000 per coin in the very near future. So if the value of this Bitcoin is going to go up substantively, and it's still peanuts compared to what the Federal Reserve deals with and what the US government routinely spends on a daily basis, it will start to matter, and those coins will be valuable in the fact that the US dollar keeps getting devalued through US monetary policy. So it's going to be important for us to keep track of what exactly they're saying is the mechanism for custodying this, how they're doing it, and then the proofs around it. Just as, we heard from Doge and Elon Musk that they wanted to go in and audit Fort Knox and see how much gold is there and make proof of those reserves. Proof of reserves around crypto is going to be an important thing for all holders and anybody who has a strategic reserve, from the states to the various countries that saying they're doing it, to the various companies in the world that have said they're holding a certain amount of Bitcoin. I don't think it's going to be this thing where you can just put it on your asset sheet and say that you've got it without proving that you've got it in a way that auditors are going to accept. So I think we're moving into an era of, how do you audit this correctly, and how do you prove that you have it, and how do you demonstrate to the world that you're still in control of it? Because if you're going to price in the value of Bitcoin for certain companies that are saying they hold a certain amount of it, I think that there's going to be a demand that you actually prove it, especially as companies in equities markets have a certain part of their value is in assets that they hold, something like Bitcoin.
You bring up when I see reserves in government, I get very nervous because there is a temptation to take things that are laying around, and when you have the when you have when you have the I don't know what word I'm looking for here, the structure of government, so such that people can leave and maybe flee and be anonymous and live somewhere in the future. There is the possibility of politicians or bureaucrats who come into control of that, of taking it, and this is why this is why governments operate on debt and budgets, so that there is no cash or piggy bank for or the cash or the piggy bank is minimalized, and people who come into power cannot empty out the cash or piggy bank. So this is also,
it's really hard to drive a truck up to Fort Knox and get away with it if you're one of the politicians that's in charge, I suppose. And same thing with the strategic oil reserve. It's not like you can just pull up a couple of trucks and make off with the oil. It's pretty difficult to pull off. But you've got a good point here. It's not going to be that hard to make off with a bunch of the Bitcoin if it's held in an inappropriate way, and some nefarious individual or cabal of people who take power and then are suddenly find themselves in control of that strategic reserve, just absconding with it. Yeah, it's a good point.
well, it's
Yeah.
also it's fairly. Go ahead, Rusty. Go ahead.
I was just going to say on that point, we've always made, the point that there is no clawback when it comes to cryptocurrency. When something gets taken, there is no way to really get that back without taking it back yourself. If somebody were to take $2,000 from my bank account, the bank can just say, hey, we reimburse you, and we can just call it square. But with cryptocurrency, there isn't that issue. And it's all fun and games. But if you take from a country's reserves or a country's money, then we can start really having some problems.
Well, I saw that some people wanted to roll back the clock on Ethereum after North Korea stole all those ETH. But going also back to backing up a truck to Fort Knox and taking the gold in Fort Knox, it's been done. Because we've talked about those reserves don't actually exist. Central banks, the politicians in central banks, they didn't send their aide with a limo to go load up with gold. But what they did do was pass rules that said, oh, we have somebody before me had this crazy idea to put all this gold in a vault and leave it there. How inefficient is that? Let's go ahead and lend this out to banks. Oh, here's a bank that I happen to own. And this bank turned around and lent that gold out to other people, and they physically delivered it, and now we can't get it back. So these are the problems of reserves, and the taking of it isn't always with three guys in a car and holding up a teller at the bank window. There are more sophisticated ways to get that gold and leave.
Yeah, and I even think about the strategic oil reserve as an interesting political tool and weapon. I can't even count the number of times that I've heard during an election cycle of who's ever in power saying, well, gas prices and oil is really important. And so, to help my political campaign and to make sure that it's a favorable economic situation that I'm trying to get elected into, let's release a bunch of oil from the strategic reserve and depress prices and bring down the price of gas and oil so that it's a more favorable type of thing. I can imagine the type of gamesmanship that could be played with Bitcoin and a strategic reserve of crypto assets to try to curry favor with the electorate. Who knows exactly how that might play out. You could imagine somebody as a politician saying, well, let's just airdrop everybody a little bit of Bitcoin. And now that's like the refund checks that, were handed out by Trump and signed by him personally during the COVID pandemic. You could think of all kinds of shenanigans that might get played with. So yeah, government amassing large amounts of treasury and then sitting on it doesn't seem like maybe the best idea in the world.
Well, as we have better tools for tracking and seeing where these assets are, because the good thing about Bitcoin and the advantage that it has on gold is that you can see if it's moved or what address that it's in, although you can't necessarily see who controls that address, but you can see when it's moved. So to me, that is a step in the right direction. As more people are also able to see where government is moving money and keeping money, that is going to put more pressure on governments, or take away the ability of them to abuse the ignorance of groups of people. So, and I wonder, because we started this conversation with M2 and talking about these monetary bases, and these all stem from this notion of the quantity of money sets prices. As more people know what that quantity is, and if the government is debasing their currency by printing more than the reserves are, or they're not seeing a correlated rise in the price of those reserves, it's going to put governments in a sticky position. And we're already seeing this. Think about what's going on with the price of eggs and the inability of the Trump administration to bring down those prices despite their promise to do so. And El Salvador, President Bukele in El Salvador took flack last year whenever he said, if if the grocery stores don't lower their prices, we know that they're taking more than more than what their fair share should be with regard with what they're charging over the cost of production. We're going to start setting those prices. And Nayib Bukele took a lot of flack, but because here he is, this supposed libertarian person, but libertarians are going to find out that governments want to control or must be in control of prices by the quantity or by setting the price, and that's going to be hard for them to get around. And this notion of using the quantity of money to control that and to set the rules or the set the parameters for what's possible in our lives is going to look a lot different. We're already seeing I don't know if you saw AOC and Anna Paulina Luna had a joint bill to limit the rates that credit card companies charge.
I saw that. Strange bedfellows on that one.
Yeah,
Isn't
Strange Bedfellows is right.
isn't that the first thing you thought? That's the first thing that I thought. It's like, wow, I would never have expected this type of a team up at all.
I mean, I would love to hear AOC and Anna Paulina talk about how they came together to agree on legislation. And really, like, this is also what drives me crazy in this supposedly a bipolar world or segmented society that we live in. We want the same thing, but people think of different ways of doing it. AOC, fixed prices. Traditionally, Anna Paulina Luna would have said we need to fix this on the back end by what the interest rate and the reserves are. But here we're learning more about how government's relationship with money works, and all of a sudden AOC and Anna Paulina have a joint bill together. So that's the future.
Yep.
Grant, we're on time, or we're over time. I don't know if you have anything to add. I think leaving it with AOC and Anna Paulina, capping credit card interest at 10%, and no mention of Elizabeth Warren, mind you. So it gets even better.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end. So we'll keep an eye on the price of Bitcoin. Definitely check out some of those links if you're interested in this idea for how the price of Bitcoin could potentially track with the M2. But yeah, we'll see you next time on FOMO.